Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I appreciate you stopping by. So I do die cutting on my cards almost as much as I do stamping. I think there are so many great things that you can do with die cutting, but I always am looking for more. I always want to find ways to stretch my products to find new looks. Well, today I'm going to share lots of techniques for die cut inlay. This is where you place die cut pieces back into its original shape, or you mix and match them. I have like 9 techniques I'm going to share today with even more cards. Now I've done some of these techniques in past videos, but I thought I'd pull them all together and add a few new ones in this video. Now I'll be using a variety of dies today, different ones that I've been wanting to use for some time. However, you can use dies that you already have, so I encourage you to watch this and then look through your stash to see what you can use for the techniques. Okay, for all of my die cutting today, I will be using my Gemini Junior die cutting machine, simply because it's a workhorse and it cuts beautifully through any die. You can use any die cut machine you have, keep that in mind, but I did want to show you how I like to arrange my plates for my Gemini Junior when I'm die cutting intricate dies like I'm using on most of today's cards. And I have a fun trick to share with you. I start with the clear cutting plate, then I put down my metal adapter plate, my plastic shim, and then the magnetic shim. Now you can just keep these piled this way and always keep them in this order, but what I like to do when I'm doing a lot of die cutting is I take some tape and tape these together. That way I don't have to worry about them sliding apart or getting out of order. So I just put tape around the edges and now I can pretend that's one plate and I can continue to do my die cutting. For my regular everyday die cutting, I don't use the metal adapter plate, so I just slide that out from the tape. But for the intricate dies I'm using on these upcoming cards, I like to put that in there. You'll just have to test it out and see if it's needed for whatever die you're using. Okay, let's start with my first example. This is my first technique for die cut inlay where you put pieces back into a die cut. And this technique is to just do partial inlay. So instead of filling in the entire die cut with the inlay pieces, I'm just doing some. My first example uses the Crafter's Companion Clamshell die. On this card, I decided to use Stick-It double-sided adhesive. I'll show you other options during this video. This adhesive is nice because you can put it onto your cardstock before you die cut, and then you basically have a sticker die cut. It's got the adhesive on it. So I place the adhesive onto my cardstock, use a bone folder to really rub it in place, and then I put my die onto the cardstock side. I decided to put a little bit of tape on this just so it doesn't shift as I run it through my die cut machine. I then place this onto my clear cutting plate so that the cutting edge of the die will go up against the cutting plate. I then put my magnetic shim onto the back of the die, run that through my die cut machine, and it'll cut beautifully. Again, use whatever die cutting machine you have. If you have trouble die cutting with an intricate die like this one, you just want to put a metal adapter plate in there. But I'm telling you, I love my Gemini Junior. It cuts beautifully. Next, I'm using a Spellbinder's tool just to knock out some of those little pieces before I pull the background out. Now I can remove the release paper, and we have a sticky back die cut. I'm going to go ahead and add that on to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. And there we've got a beautiful background design already. With Stick-It double-sided adhesive, you want to make sure to press in place. It gives you a little wiggle room until you've pressed it firmly in place. Okay, now it's time to do the partial die cut inlay. So we're going to inlay those colorful cardstock pieces to create those 4 rainbows. So I went through my cardstock scraps and I picked out different scraps that were just the right size to die cut those few rainbows. Ran it through my die cut machine and I kept the little curved pieces that we will inlay into our white background. So I just run a little liquid adhesive into the opening. Then I place my die cut into that opening. So this is a die cut inlay technique. It presses into those openings and ends up with a smooth finish. Now I could do this entire background, but that would take me a long time. That's why I decided to do partial die cut inlay and only inlay some of the pieces. So after I've done my pink parts of the rainbow, I went ahead and die cut from an orange scrap and I placed in the orange part of the rainbow And I continued that until I had 4 rainbows going across my card. Each time you really want to press down with the bone folder to make sure they stay in place. Now I white heat embossed this sentiment on black cardstock and I trimmed it down. And I'm using a foam strip. These are great foam adhesive strips right on the back. But I still like to put liquid adhesive on the foam strip. That way I can move it around. See, I'm sliding it around until I get the perfect placement. And I use a T-ruler to make sure it's straight. Then I can press it down and that liquid adhesive will dry and it'll stay put and has great dimension. I'm using my Creative Detailer tool to remove some extra embossing powder. This tool is good for that, but also for removing some ink boo-boos. It's an electronic eraser that works great. I also used a Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen to add a little bit of shimmer to those rainbows. So here's a look at the final card and how we have that smooth die cut inlay for the rainbows. And I saved a lot of time by only doing a partial die cut inlay. It would have taken a lot of time to do that entire background. This is a great time-saving technique, but still allows you to get more creative with your dies. By the way, that sentiment is from this Mighty Hands Blessed Words stamp set. Okay, my next die cut inlay technique idea is to do setback inlay. You can see how the negative space, the white die cut, stands up and the color is set back. There are a few ways to do this, and I will link here to another video that doesn't involve inlay itself, but looks like it does. So you can check that out if you want to. For this card, I'm putting Stick It double-sided adhesive onto the back of a piece of white cardstock as I did before. This time, however, I'm not going to die cut this. Instead, I've already die cut a doily from white cardstock, and I'm going to lay that into the adhesive. That way, all of those tiny little openings have adhesive in them already. I'm putting the release paper back onto it so I can really press that die down into the paper with the bone folder without causing my bone folder to stick to it. So that release paper is very handy to keep. I then am trimming all the excess away from the outside. So now I have this die cut with all the openings with adhesive in the inside. Okay, now I'm going to cut the same die from pink cardstock, but I'll leave the die cut in the die. And here's a great trick for making die cut inlay more simple. I'm laying this die over our die cut, the white die cut. Remember, all of the open area has adhesive in it. So from the back side of my die, I'm using a craft pick to press through any holes that I want the paper to transfer. So I'm pressing the pink paper, the little tiny pieces of pink paper, out of the die and into the adhesive on my die cut. This is a huge time saver. If a few don't transfer, that's okay. You can do those by hand. But in general, a lot of them will transfer. So I continued this with other colors. Here I am with the blue. I die cut it from blue paper, lined it up with our white die cut, and I'm pressing through the holes on the back of the die to press those tiny bits of blue paper into the openings on the white. Sorry, I put on a sweatshirt here that's huge. It was freezing, and I didn't realize it would look so big in the video. Okay, so there you can see how I've inlaid all of those colorful pieces. It took me about 20 minutes to do. I also die cut another white doily, and I'm gluing that right on top. So this is where we're creating that set back look. So all those pieces were inlaid, and now we're setting it back by creating dimension on the white. This doily is beautiful, and I plan to make more cards with it. Lila even did a bunch and kept all the little pieces to make a shaker card. So here's a completed card. I stamped hugs in the center and then added it to a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch white note card. I love making square cards. Now that hug sentiment is from this Clearly Besotted stamp set. It's such a beautiful set. And I like the small sentiments included. They're great to put at the center of dies like this one. Okay, my next technique is to use pattern paper for your die cut inlay. This is a favorite technique of mine as I've collected some pattern paper over the years, but never really use it. So this is a great way to put any of those favorite pattern papers to use. So this is the Poppy Stamp Summer Blossom Sidekick frame set. It comes with this large frame die and a stencil that matches up so you can do fun inking techniques and layering. There are also those additional flower dies that I'll use to create layered flowers on my final card. I have a piece of white cardstock here that I'm going to once again back with Stick It double-sided adhesive. I promise to show some other options for adhesives later in this video. Now I'm going to remove the release paper to expose all of that adhesive. I have a white die cut that I created with that frame die, and I'm placing it right onto the adhesive, putting the release paper back in place so that I can press it down firmly. Now we have all of those openings with exposed adhesive. Next, I die cut the frame again, but this time from pattern paper. I'm not going to use the frame piece on this card, but rather the little pieces left over, and I will inlay those into our white frame and press it right into the exposed adhesive. From the rectangle piece, I've die cut a hello die. That's from Birch Press, and I white heat embossed a sentiment underneath it. And I'll put that right into our frame background. I then die cut hello from white cardstock, and I'll place that into the opening. So now we have a completely smooth background. It's all even because of that inlay technique. It's such a beautiful look and looks so much better than just sticking the die cut on top of the pattern paper. Another advantage of doing a die cut inlay is you have lots of leftover pieces for other cards. In this case, I have my pattern paper die cut frame and my pattern paper hello die cut. So I can actually make the same card but reverse. It's a great way to really stretch your supplies and make more than one card at a time. Here I'm taking some of those extra white flower die cuts and adding them with foam tape for a layered look. I also die cut 3 more hello die cuts, and I'll stack those on top of the hello die cut on our card. I felt like that hello got lost with everything on this card, so this will help to make it stand out more. This is another one of those little things that doesn't take long to do, but makes a big difference in the end. So I added that onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and then also added some white pearls to the center of my flowers. So there you can see a fun way to use up your pattern paper scraps for a die cut inlay technique. And by the way, that white heat embossed sentiment is from this My Favorite Things Well Hello There stamp set, which I use a lot in this video. Okay, my next idea for die cut inlay involves using layered dies to do a layered inlay technique. Layering dies are becoming very popular. There are a lot of them on the market, and I will say they do have a higher price point. In this case, you get 3 background dies together. So you got to find creative ways to use it to get lots of different looks because you want to make sure that the investment is worth it. If you don't have background layering dies like this, I will link here to a video where you can get the same kind of look using one background die. However, I will admit I'm a big fan of these layered background dies because I use them in many different ways. Now, as I mentioned, for this one, I'm going to do a layered die cut inlay. So I have cut all 3 dies from 3 different shades of yellow cardstock. This time I decided to use Gina K liquid adhesive to glue the layers together. I just put dots of adhesive here and there, and it's a super strong adhesive, so I know it won't come apart. I could have used Stick It double-sided adhesive for this, but it would go through a lot for one card, so I felt like this was more economical. Okay, now it's time to do some inlay. So I'm putting some liquid adhesive into some of the openings on our background. I'm taking a die cut that still has the little pieces in place, and I'm pressing through the die cut. See how I'm pushing each of those little pieces into the adhesive on our note card. This is another easy way to do a die cut inlay. Before, I pushed it through the die because the die cut was stuck in my die. In this case, the die cut came out of the die, so I did this process instead. After I did some inlay pieces, this time I'm going to layer some pieces. So notice how I am, just by hand this time, popping in a few of these little pieces into the second layer of my layered die cutting. So you can do these by hand. It really doesn't take as long as you think it would. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together, and I really enjoy doing it. After I have those pieces in place, I'm actually doing some layering here. See how I just put some adhesive on top of our little pieces and then added another piece on top of that. So this part isn't actually inlay, but it's layering. So I'm mixing inlaying with layering and just getting a really cool looking background. Now I know this process isn't for everyone, but for me, I'd rather do this over coloring. I enjoy this and find it kind of therapeutic. For this sentiment, I'm using the Poppy Stamps Luscious Script Hello die. Really like the style of this one, and the die set includes both the word hello and its shadow, so I decided to use black and white cardstock for that. I'll glue that onto my card, and then I stamped a sentiment below it. Notice on my background I have inlay and layering, and I even used gold metallic paper for some of my die cut pieces. So this example shows that you can be really creative and do whatever you want with all the little pieces that you have left over from die cutting. And by the way, that sentiment that says, "Hope your day shines as bright as you do," is from this Altenew Bright Blossoms stamp set. I thought that sentiment worked perfect with that layered background. And by the way, I had those leftover rounded pieces, and I decided to use them to create this simple card. I didn't do any inlaying or any layering with this. I just put the 3 die cuts together, stamped a sentiment below it, and then added a few gold gems. So you can see how you can take these layered dies and get a lot from them. You just got to be a bit creative. Okay, my next idea is to do die cut inlay with metallic paper. If you die cut your main die with metallic paper and then inlay regular cardstock, it looks like you have a metal frame. Now putting this together was very similar to my early example, so I'm going to skip through a little bit of it, but show the main parts. I used the Paper Rose frame die for this. I bought this a while ago and been wanting to use it. I die cut the frame from gold cardstock. I like to use tonic gold cardstock. It has a beautiful mirror shine to it. And then I added it onto a piece of white cardstock that was covered with Stick-It double-sided adhesive. I then die cut the frame from other colors of cardstock, laid that die right onto our background, and again pressed through the die with my craft pick to press the colored cardstock pieces into the adhesive on our background. So this is just like I did on my set back die cutting technique where I had that doily. This is just a faster way to push all of those tiny little colored die cut pieces into our background. So here I have a completely inlay background. I even inlaid that white piece. Once I was done, I added it to a blue note card and also added some blue gems here and there. I really like how that gold paper die cut looks like a metal frame. Now for the sentiment, I used the Jane's Doodle Kind stamp set. Really like the sentiments of kindness in this one, and I thought it was perfect at the center of the frame. Okay, my next example for doing die cut inlay involves doing embellishments for inlaying instead of little cardstock pieces. And of course, since I'm addicted to using jewels and gems on my cards, that's what I decided to do with the inlay. I'm using this new Birch Press layering die set. Again, this is a die set that has 3 large background dies included, and those 3 large background dies cut these pieces. So you have the outline, which is the size of a note card, this open circle that I'm putting glue on now, and then this circle element that's smaller at the top of the screen there. So you can use these pieces separately on cards or use them together, which I decided to do today. What's neat is Birch Press designs all of their dies so that the circle opening is the same between dies, so you can switch out the pieces if you have multiple sets. What I did is I die cut each of the layers from white cardstock and glued them together, and I'm putting them on a Simon Says Stamp Fog note card. That's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Once I have that all glued down, I'm putting little drops of Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in some of the openings. So I decided to use some blue, purple, and green gems here. Any kind would work. If you don't have any jewels, you could also use sequins for this. Little beads or even drops of like Nouveau drops or perfect pearls would be great for this. And since I'm setting these gemstones into the die cutting, they're kind of protected when you put it through the mail because the die cutting surrounds them. So here's the finished card that I did. You can see how it really catches the light nicely. Wanted to go for a soft color look, and then I put a bold sentiment in the center. I'll be making more cards using this die set in future videos because you can use it in so many ways because you can switch all the pieces out and use different elements. I used a Birch Press Hello die cut for the sentiment and also the stamped greeting from the My Favorite Things Well Hello stamp set. Okay, my next technique idea is to do glitter inlay. Now there are a few different ways you can use glitter for die cut inlay. One of the ways you could do it is just put adhesive into the little openings of your die cut and then sprinkle glitter on. But I decided to use glitter cardstock instead. This is the Birch Press Regal Peacock layer dies, which are really beautiful and I thought would be fun with a touch of glitter. I die cut the solid die from white cardstock and I'm covering it with my tape runner. This is Gina K adhesive, so this shows you can even use your regular tape runners for the die cut inlay techniques. I then have my layers here in different colors of green and blue cardstock, and I'll layer those on top also. Really, you can use any adhesive here, but with this, all of those little white openings that you see have adhesive on them, so they're ready for the glitter paper to be added. Now, I couldn't find the perfect color of glitter paper, so this is a trick I like to do. I like to buy silver glitter paper or white glitter paper like the one you see here, and then color it with permanent markers. You could use alcohol inks, Copic markers, Sharpies, whatever you have that's permanent. You color your glitter cardstock, heat set it so it's dry, and then you can die cut it and you have custom colored glitter cardstock. I've decided not to buy glittered cardstocks anymore and instead just get white and I can make it whatever color I want. So I die cut one of the layers from that blue glitter cardstock that I created. I left the paper in the die, and I'm doing that trick where I line it up with my layer die cutting and I poke through the holes in the back, which pushes those little glitter die cut pieces into the adhesive that's exposed on my layered background piece. This is really a time saver as opposed to putting all those tiny little pieces inside. And there you can see how they all transferred in place. And you can use a craft pick to kind of move them into place if they're a little off. And then you use a bone folder to press them down so they don't come out. I also cut the body from that custom blue glitter cardstock that I made. Now notice on the background of this card, I used one of the Epiphany layer dies. For my last card example, I just die cut one from white cardstock and glued that onto a white note card. It just adds a little bit of interest, but doesn't distract from the peacock. I also added a Hello Friend sentiment from the Simon Says Stamp Simple Sentiments 1 stamp set. So keep in mind you can use glitter for die cut inlay. It makes it a lot easier to use glitter cardstock, but you could use loose glitter if you prefer. Okay, my next technique I call shadow inlay. So a lot of word dies these days come with the word die and the shadow die to match with it. Instead of layering like we normally do, I think it's fun to do an inlay. So here's a Poppy Stamps Luscious Script Thanks die. So you've got the word die itself and then the shadow. I cut the shadow first, then line the word die with the shadow die cut, run it through your die cut machine, and then you get this outline. So you see that thanks outline there? I'm going to inlay with that. So I die cut thanks from white cardstock and glued it on to a solid blue colored thanks shadow. I put adhesive around the edge, as you can see I'm doing here. Liquid adhesive works great for this. Then I take that outline die cut and put it right around it. So now instead of a layered thanks, we have a shadow inlay. So it's all nice and smooth. It really gives a fun, different look. Subtle things like this look pretty subtle in a video, but in real life, they stand out and make for a really interesting card. So there you can see how you get a smooth inlay look. I wanted to show you the rest of the card too. I used the Decorative Dies Pretty Floral Branches die set. I really like the style of these flower dies. I used the larger one for this card, and I die cut it from white cardstock. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back and adding that to a note card that I've stamped with a Gina K background stamp. I went with soft colors here, so I have soft pool colors, and I'm adding that in place. I wanted to make some of those flowers pop up a bit. So I die cut the flower die again from white cardstock, and I'm cutting some of those flowers out. You can see me doing that kind of on the bottom of the screen there. And then I'll glue them on top of the die cut on our card. I did this 3 or 4 times and then had a stacked look to my flowers. It took that plain, simple flower die cut that's nice and flat and added dimension to it, which really makes it pop and stand out against the background. Okay, so let's look at the final card. I did add some soft pool jewels to the center of my layered flowers. And you can see here how layering those flowers really added a lot to it. We also have our smooth die cut inlay thanks die cut on the bottom. It's actually a pretty simple card to create, but it has a lot of interest thanks to all the die cutting tricks that we did. And one little tip, when I go to buy word dies these days, I usually only buy the ones that include the shadow with it, so I can do fun techniques like this one. Okay, my next idea is to do colored inlay. This is super simple, but it does save time over searching for all the perfect colors of cardstock. With this card, I also used another adhesive option. This is the E6000 spray adhesive. Now, I normally don't like to use spray adhesives. In fact, I usually take this outside when I spray it, but I wanted to show you in a video. What you can do is lay your die cut into a box, spray the adhesive over it. I just do kind of a light spritz over the entire thing. And then you can pick it up and add it to your project. It holds well and it's very quick to use. So I just wanted to show you that that's another option. Now it's time to do the inlay. I used a hello die cut that has the shadow and the word hello too. I die cut the shadow 3 times from black cardstock and glued those together for a layered dimension. I then die cut the word hello itself from white cardstock, but I left the letters in its negative space. On the back I put a piece of tape so that the letters would stay in the negative space as I added color to them. I find it easier to add color with the negative space around it, as opposed to adding color to each individual letter. I then quickly added Copic marker over each piece, but you can use any markers or paint or anything you want here. This gives you the option to make your paper any color you want, and you don't have to search for the perfect colors. I then went over it with a tonic shimmer pen so that it would have a little bit of shimmer to each of those letters. Now it's time to do the inlay. I die cut the shadow of the word hello from black cardstock, and now I'm taking the hello word die itself and die cutting from that shadow. So you can see how I'm lining it up here, super easy to do. And I'll use little pieces of tape to hold it in perfect placement. I then run it through my die cut machine, and I end up with that outline like we did before with the thanks. Now this is the layered black hello shadow die cut I created earlier, and I'm covering it with lots of liquid adhesive. I'm then putting the outline around it, so you can see how there's an outline there, but the center is open and there's still adhesive there. I can take all of my colored die cuts down here and add them onto the adhesive. So we're inlaying each of these letters into the negative space of that hello. So I'm doing that shadow inlay technique that I showed you before, but this time I used a marker to color all of the pieces. Since this is the focal point of our card, I think it's worth it to take that little bit of extra time to do the inlay technique. Now I added it to that die cut note card that I showed you earlier, and then I added a simple sentiment strip underneath it. There you can see that smooth inlay that we get with that word hello, and also the bit of shimmer that I added with the Tonic Nouveau pen. You could also have used glitter paper for each of those letters or any specialty papers that you may have. Now that little sentiment strip is from the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Word Stamp Set, which I've used multiple times in videos. I wanted to show another example of this color inlay technique, where you use your markers to custom color the little pieces that you inlay into your main die cut. In this case, I did some blending with Copic markers. This is the Birch Press Lotus Flower die set. I really like this, so I'm actually going to show you 2 card examples. There are 3 dies and they layer together nicely. For this, I wanted to show you how I usually use my Gemini Junior plates. I usually don't use the metal adapter. I only put that in if it's an intricate die. I start with the clear cutting plate, then the plastic shim, the magnetic shim, and I tape those together. These always stay together and I don't have to worry about it. I then can do my die cutting with regular dies. This is how I usually have my plate set up for normal die cutting, and I only add that metal adapter plate in if I have intricate dies like the ones I used earlier in this video. But this one cuts beautifully and do most dies with the plate set up this way. I wanted to keep all these little white die cuts in place, so I'm putting some tape on the back. And now we can color all of those little pieces, as I did earlier with my hello die cut. This time I decided to do some blending. You really could do anything here. You could do inking techniques, you could paint, whatever you want. Once I have my pieces colored, it's time to do the inlay technique. Now this time I'm doing a little bit different. I die cut the same die from white cardstock, and I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back. And I'm going to put this right on top of our colored die cuts, so all that extra scribbling we did is covered up. I then decided to pop out the 2 big pieces, the one at the top and the one at the bottom. And now we can add the other layered lotus flower die cuts on top. So this one has a little more opening, so we get that layered look. And then I put the third one on top also. I used liquid adhesive for this because it seemed the easiest, but any adhesive would work. I then removed the tape from the back and glued that to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 Simon Says Stamp Fog note card. And now I'm going to glue in those white pieces I took out before. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep them. I decided to add them in the end. I also stamped Hello Friend with black ink. And then I used my Tonic Shimmer Aqua Pen to add a little bit of shimmer to each of the colored pieces. So there you can see the fun blending we get with the Copic markers. And we get that fun inlay technique with the layering. By the way, that Hello Friend is from the Simon Says Stamp Simple Sentiments 1 stamp set that I've used many times in this video. Now I have one bonus card for you before we go. It uses that same Lotus flower die. No special technique here, but I had some leftover green cardstock pieces I wanted to use, so I thought I'd make this. On the background I did some subtle stamping, which is something fun that you could incorporate into die cut inlay if you want. This is the Simon Says Stamp You Matter background stamp, which is one of my most used stamps. And then the thank you sentiment is again from the Simon Says Stamp Simple Sentiments 1 stamp set. Okay, there you have a way to stretch your dies by using them with different die cut inlay techniques. I hope you'll give them a try. All of the supplies that I talk about today are in the YouTube description below. In the middle are a couple other videos that might help you to look at your dies differently and get more from them. Up at the top, you can click to subscribe or head over to my blog to learn more. Thank you again for watching. We'll see you again soon and have a wonderful week.